Hello, everyone. My name is Aniska, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this event. I work for the I work for the Center of International Sustainable Development Law at Cambridge, where I'm also a student, and I'm delighted to introduce our chairs. So, Kazi Amdadur Haq, who is working with Friendship, which is an incredible international NGO in Bangladesh who do local community work. And he's also the Senior Director of environmental strategy and the head of climate action. And he's a climate activist, he's a legal practitioner, and he's also worked in media and public policy. So we're incredibly delighted to have you here. We also have Professor Marie-Claire Cordonier-Seger to his left. She is the executive secretary of the Climate Law and Governance Initiative of COP29. She is also the chair in Sustainable Development Law and Policy at the University of Cambridge. And she is the senior director of the center I just mentioned, so the Center for International Sustainable Development Law at Cambridge. She has written over 26 books in the field, so she's incredibly experienced, and we're delighted to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much, Aniska. And thanks especially to the work that you and other young people and climate activists and students are doing around the world in your field to try to find a solution to these problems. We definitely need you, you and thousands and millions like you. So we really greatly appreciate it. I'd like to welcome everyone to this event today. And I'd like to thank you especially for making the time in a busy Bonn climate conference schedule to be with us. As you know, this is Courage, Contributions and Compliance, Implementing Paris Agreement Adaptation and Resilience Commitments. And this side event is co-hosted by Friendship in Bangladesh, the Green Mobilisation Initiative, who are online with us from Nigeria, and the Center for International Sustainable Development Law, which is based in Canada, the UK, and Switzerland, together with our colleagues from Kenya, Chile, and Costa Rica in various regions of the world. We are going to be focusing on fast, effective legal pathways for adaptation, resilience, and sustainable development, and how these pathways require tailored climate law and governance capacity building and reform. This event will share new legal advances for water resources management, nature-based solutions, clean energy transition, and other aspects of implementing the Paris Agreement and achieving climate justice. We're focusing in particular today on how to scale up climate law and governance solutions exponentially for net zero and vulnerable countries, adaptation and resilience, advancing key sustainable development goals. I'll mention that personally, I think that this is one of the most crucial elements of implementing the Paris Agreement. I was born in the United Kingdom, and my family comes from East Anglia, from the fenlands that were drained in the 1800s, that would have been one of the most important carbon sinks for the world, and are instead growing 70% of the vegetables for the United Kingdom. The fenlands are now flooding. We're losing our roads, we're losing our villages, and the ocean is clawing away communities that live on the cliffs. We're watching nature take back what is hers. And of course, it will take an 800-year-old university with it. And that's just where I live right now. In Canada, we fought for years to stop the deforestation on the West Coast in the ancient temperate rainforest where I grew up. Those forests for which we hunger struck for 26 days, which we blocked roads, which we occupied ministers' offices to save, are burning because of climate change. And we watch these impacts as they get worse. And I would bet that everyone here, and indeed most of us now, have stories like this one, where we're watching the climate change and we're feeling so angry and helpless because here in this community, we have spent decades working together to prevent this very happening. So law and policy is part of the solution. It's also in the past, let's be honest, been part of the problem. Defending those who really now must know better. And we are, as much as possible, focusing on activating those legal and governance pathways to fill the crucial gaps and to, as much as possible, move us forward, advancing, incentivizing, promoting the solutions. So we're here going to focus, together with our colleagues from the Green Mobilisation Initiative and from Friendship, on the necessary steps needed for climate law and governance to bolster the obligation for states to cooperate and strengthen the ongoing effort in the development of new revised regulatory instruments, especially in light of new scientific knowledge. And we're also going to look at the fastest and most effective legal pathways for adaptation, resilience in climate law and governance, and support for ongoing efforts by states to formulate and elaborate rules, standards, and recommended practices. We're going to focus especially on capacity building and reform, on addressing gaps, on proposing innovations for ambitious NDC targets in relation to adaptation and resilience. I will note that over 200 people have registered worldwide for this event online, and I'd like to welcome them, welcome all of you, including those who are joining us online to listen, and also those who are watching this recording afterward. The corollary is the session is being recorded, so please just signal to us if for whatever reason you can't be recorded, and we will ensure that any of the recording elements turn the camera away from you in the final cut. We're going to first hear in this conversation from the other two co-chairs, one with me and one online. And then we're going to turn to a leader in the field who has just won, together with many, many colleagues and countries, a victory in the International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea. And he will speak to us a little bit about that coming in online. We will then have a first roundtable that focuses on the gaps in climate governance, and a second roundtable that focuses on innovative solutions toward more ambitious NDCs in relation to adaptation and resilience especially. And we will have an interactive Q&A with everyone here, so please start already thinking of your questions, and also with the questions and answers that those of you who are joining us online will have to say. Finally, we're very, very deeply honored that Her Royal Highness Princess Esmeralda of Belgium is joining us. She's already here online listening as well, and she has graciously agreed to give us a closing address. So with that flying overview of a rich program, I will turn to my colleague, Kazi, who has a welcome as a co-chair.
Welcome. Good morning, everyone, and who are here with us and online. I will very briefly will share my feeling. That is, today we are in a crossroads. One leads to destruction, and another is inspiration, realization for a better world. We have to decide it, and we have to reduce the gap between the policymakers and practitioners. We can't afford such a critical stage, you know. Food insecurity, they are in critical cases. So when I meet them, we are really feel very much guilty, obligated. And still we have time. We can take forward the commitment, the Paris Agreement, and commitment with the global leaders. So this is my appeal today, and we need to revisit our law, provisions, policies, and entitlements. And finally, I must say, what are the local solutions and what are the initiatives in place? We can't keep ourselves away from a big building, you know, keeping our eyes closed, you know, away from those solutions. We can't ignore those solutions. We need to revisit those solutions. If these are applicable, this is our obligation to make sure the solutions are a part of the policies, procedures, and provisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Kazi. I will now call upon our third co-chair, the founder and CEO of Green Mobilisation Initiative, Gabrielle Aborele, who is online from Nigeria. Gabrielle, would you like to say just one or two brief words of welcome?
Thank you very much. It is nice to be here. I would like to thank every of all the panelists that are seated in Bonn and every viewer online. You're welcome to this very all-important side event that we intend to explore courage, contributions, and compliance, implementing the Paris Agreement climate adaptation and resilience commitment. We all know climate change is one of the most pressing issues of our time, with far-reaching consequences for our planet and its inhabitants, as we continue to emit greenhouse gases and neglect sustainable practices. And we're all aware, especially in this part of the world, Nigeria, where I am, the consequences are everywhere. We are heavily affected by climate change, and we need legal solutions that could really help us to come out from this very monumental climate change issue that is affecting our lives, affecting our livelihoods. So I would like to tell our audience that this side event is going to be a very robust discussion. So each and every one of us, we should be very, very attentive, because we have very eminently qualified resource persons that will help to open up our eyes to new strategies and solutions to combat climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gabriel, and thank you for the truly remarkable work that you are leading in Nigeria with the Green Mobilisation Initiative. I know we will hear from you later to give our formal thanks, acknowledgements, and closing after Her Royal Highness. So it is not goodbye, but simply thank you. Wonderful. We will now turn to a dear colleague and friend, Professor Payam Akyavan, who is a member of the Permanent Court of Arbitration and also Senior Fellow of the Massey College at the University of Toronto. Payam, together with lawyers from around the world, led a team just recently on behalf of the Commission of Small Island States in order to bring forward a request for an advisory opinion in the International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea. And that climate change advisory opinion was, of course, released last week. And Payam joins us today from the UN Small Island Developing States Conference that was taking place last week, where he has recorded a very short 4-minute video to talk to us about that recent climate change advisory opinion, setting the context for the rest of our panel on climate law and governance. I'm going to ask for Dr. Antoinette Nestor from our team to cue Payam.
I'm grateful to the organizers for giving me the honor of sharing with you some brief remarks on the remarkable victory of small island states on climate change in international law, on securing the first opinion on climate change and the obligations of states, which was delivered by the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea in Hamburg on May 21st. I am here in Antigua and Barbuda, where the United Nations Small Island Developing States Conference was just held. And what was very clear was the tremendous importance that small island states attach, not just to this opinion, but to changing the conversation from one of vague and empty promises under the voluntary scheme of the Paris Agreement to binding legal obligations. And in fact, the Commission of Small Island States was established at COP26 in Glasgow in 2021 because of the frustration, in this instance, of the prime ministers of Antigua and Barbuda and Tuvalu, with the fact that some 30 years into the COP process, some 30 years after conclusion of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the concerns of small island states, who are the canary in the coal mine of catastrophic climate change, that their concerns, whether in respect of mitigation, adaptation, or loss and damages, was not being taken seriously by the major polluters. And of course, one realizes, being on the ground here, that for small island states, climate change has become a threat to their very existence, whether it is mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions to remain within the threshold of a 1.5 degree temperature rise above pre-industrial levels by the year 2100, or the consequence of the breach of obligations to prevent, reduce, and control marine pollution under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. And there was a predicate finding, of course, by ITLOS that greenhouse gas emissions are pollution, or as they are a substance introduced into nature activity which has deleterious effects. We now have an authoritative statement, ITLOS, which is, after all, the guardian, the constitution of the oceans, the of the sea, that emissions are pollution, that they are the exacting obligation to reduce marine pollution. Most significantly, that states must be measured best available science, and maintains 1.5 degrees as a desirable outcome. We now have an authoritative statement of law that the best available science is authoritative in determining the content of state obligations. And perhaps what is most significant in the ITLOS advisory opinion, and which will certainly shape how the International Court of Justice addresses the same issue in its advisory opinion, is that the Paris Agreement is not enough. The argument by some of the major polluters that the Paris Agreement is either lex specialis or some sort of specialized climate change regime, and that it is sufficient for states simply to make their nationally determined contributions periodically, no matter what commitments are. The tribunal has now made that is not the basis for determining whether states have complied with their obligations. Moving forward, certainly the small island states that have been speaking here at the UN CIDS conference have made it clear that they demand a change in the conversation at future COPs, and they have been forward that funding is their right, their fundamental right under international law, and we will have to see whether the major polluters will take seriously their obligations or not.
Our deepest thanks to Payam, who has joined us to explain very many pages of a very momentous historic decision by the International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea, their advisory opinion on climate change, with only a few days to read the judgment. And there will be a great deal more coming out in the next little while as we analyze this decision. But it's obvious, as everyone here, I'm sure, is aware, that it's a major victory for law and governance on climate change. I will also note that we are waiting now for further decisions of the Inter-American Court on Human Rights, including further cases that are working their way through the European Court on Human Rights. And then, of course, there is the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice after. And it will be an important international law. I think what ITLOS has taken the courage to do unanimously is to high bar for those other who will be pronouncing on these issues. And they did this deliberately. So while our victories as a community of the extreme threat that may be few and far between, meaningless, indeed, very far from meaningless. And occasionally judges will stand up with the courage, commitment that is required when they have a possibility to do so. So thank you to Payan for those words, and thank you especially to our colleagues from the entire team and indeed from across the small island states who brought that request for the advisory opinion. I'll now turn to my colleague who has kindly agreed to chair the first round.
Thank you, Marie Claire. Today, the roundtable we have two sets of panelists, and we'll talk about, discuss, share the thoughts of related gaps in Paris Agreement and between the Paris Agreement and our interventions and the whole journey taking forward, and at the same time innovations already in place. So without taking further time, I will, first of all, the major question is what are the main gaps and how can addressing them through law and governance reform open transformative pathway for adaptation, resilience, and sustainable development crisis. And the first, Professor Joe Pascal, who is the professor of environment sciences in Belgium. Well, he was the former CC. Professor Joe Pascal, please.
So I see three gaps that need to be addressed, and some of which are partially addressed already, but there's still a lot of work to do. The first one is related to climate science and climate knowledge. In this climate science itself, there was up to recently a gap in the knowledge allowing the attribution of extreme events and consequences of extreme events to climate change. And that gap is being filled, actually. It is not totally filled yet, but it is being filled. And it is clearly going to help in the coming years the judicial procedures attempting to put a responsibility on the polluters having that scientific base. But still related to climate science and climate knowledge, I think there's still a gap in relevance. Some of the knowledge, including some parts of the IPCC reports, I must say, are not always formulated or explained in a way which is policy relevant and helping or likely to help the policy and the governance process. So there's still work to do to improve the policy relevance of what the scientific community is doing in terms of climate science, climate knowledge. And when I say climate science, it's a very, very broad way. I mean, it's much broader than just climate physics, of course. And the knowledge needs to be spread better to digital system. I mean, judges often have had very little scientific training. They sometimes use with numbers. I've trained judicial, and if we want to have on a better usage of science in those procedures, still a gap. The second I would like to address, it's a short comment, was a little bit alluded in his intervention a few minutes ago when you mentioned the gap between policymakers and practice. Broaden that a little bit. I think there's a very big often, not only with the practitioners, but with the citizens and the voters, and those who very often experience the consequences of climate change in a very different way than the often privileged decision makers, who have no idea of what is a cyclone in a village when you don't have a shelter built by friendship, for example, because of course, if there's a cyclone shelter built by friendship in them, but not everybody has that chance. And this gap, and I would a gap in empathy needs to be as well. And the third and final gap to mention is, it was alluded to by Makavan said when he spoke about the consequence of the breach, the gap between and climate, environment, development friendly on one side, consequences for those who take those decisions. There's a big gap there too. I mean, whether this gap needs to be better formulated in terms of fines, I don't know. I mean, that's not my, but I see a big movement such as just explained with this, with the discussions around the notion of ecocides are going to help fill that gap. Very important to fill, because otherwise can continue to take decisions without any regard for the consequences for present and future generations.
Thank you, Professor Pascal. Actually, seeing is believing. He was in the very remotest communities in Bangladesh he visited. So that made him, so proactive. I remember, immediate after the day-long visit, a couple of days being in the remotest community, he met the head of European delegation, asked him, why not you jumped in, have to replicate already in place. In Euro need cyclone resilient house, and $1, you can protect the whole coastal areas for 35 million people, but you can't. So this is the things, and true knowledge and climate science need to be interpreted appropriately. It can't be a global universal language, very localized, let people understood, not the direction to realization. Thank you, Professor Pascal. And now we'll listen online from Megan Bowman and CCLG Director, King's College London, I believe. Professor Megan already online? Okay, thank you.
We will especially thank Professor Bonn, Climate Law and Governance in King's College London, for their world-leading work on the governance gaps in terms of finance. Professor Megan, are you with us?
I am. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yes.
Brilliant. Well, hello, everyone, and what a pleasure to be here. I want to thank Marie-Claire and Antoinette and Kazi and the team, and this amazing collaboration between CISDL and GMI and the friendship groups. Just wonderful. Such an important panel, such important topics to be discussing. And as Marie-Claire has telegraphed, I want to focus in on some finance aspects in terms of the gaps. I was at Bonn actually earlier in the conference, and three things sort of jumped out at me that I think are relevant to raise today. So the first really being the new collective quantified goal on finance is obviously going to be a hot point of discussion and contention going forward. It's something that is being worked on in Bonn as we speak, and will be picked up again in Baku. and for a number of COPs to come. But of course, time is not on our side. But the idea there is giving life to Article 2 of the Paris Agreement and the sort of matters around quality and quantum of finance, around the structure of this goal, the sources of that finance, and the contributor base particularly, and of course the time frame and transparency. And they're issues that I want to circle back to. The second way that finance is relevant, it's telling me that my internet is unstable. Is that okay for you? Are you receiving me okay? Yes?
We can hear you. It's a bit choppy, but if you want, you can cut off your camera and it may help.
Okay, great. Well, I'm happy to do that as well. Not much fun for you though, but let's see if that works. My internet should be fine, so I don't understand. All right.
You're not doing too badly. We can hear you.
Okay, great. So that's fantastic. So the second aspect of the finance.
Yes, thank you. We're getting full sentences now.
Oh, well, that's good. That's a good thing. So the second aspect is in relation to non-economic loss and the links to the NDCs, and essentially areas of investability, areas of financial need, even for non-economic loss issues. So issues around loss of culture, loss of heritage, livelihood, well-being, biodiversity, biosystems, those sorts of what might be termed non-economic losses that are very hard to quantify because we don't have the right metrics yet, but will require capacity building. They will require being noted in the NDCs and having some sort of plan which will involve financial input for capacity building, if nothing else, in them. And then the third area really is the linkages between technology and finance. And certainly earlier this week at Bonn, very productive conversations were held between about the linkages between the technology mechanism and the financial mechanisms of the UNFCCC and Paris Agreement. So all three of those aspects that I've quickly outlined relate in some way, either directly or indirectly, to finance and financial need and mobilisation. And they also implicate the private sector. And of course, the private sector will be necessary in this venture, and market capital will be necessary simply, if for no other reason than the instrumental reason of reaching the trillions of dollars required for financing to meet and implement the Paris Agreement goals. But of course, there are concerns around legitimacy and acceptability and also accountability, particularly in relation to the private sector. In other words, there are trust issues that will need to be addressed. And ways that can happen, that can happen are certainly through coalition building partnerships. Trust must be earned on both sides in an iterative process, and also between national governments, so developed countries to developing countries, and also the private sector. But in terms certainly of the law and regulation in this space, we see national regulation, national transition planning is becoming a concept now in relation to the NDCs, using NDCs as roadmaps and plans of investability. Those are messages that we're hearing loud and clear and repeatedly throughout COP-related discussions now. And also litigation as accountability. Certainly the ITLOS case, that was discussed earlier, and also even the Swiss seniors case decision handed down in May. These decisions have implications on national regulation and legislation and enforcement mechanisms, which have a necessary effect on the private sector, on business and corporations and the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. So essentially, we're going to start seeing, I think, the cascading effects of that sort of litigation on private sector accountability, as well as the direct effects, direct litigation against corporate actors and finance actors, particularly in relation to Scope 3 emissions. So all of these things are in the mix, and these are all areas to watch and all areas that are in movement at the moment, and certainly all areas where law and regulation is necessary and emerging, so that we can actually move these issues forward on the SDGs and Paris Agreement implementation. Thank you.
Professor Megan. Our internet, though, we could not hear for a few seconds, few minutes, we can understand climate finance today's the different interpretations, all those things. Loan, subsidy, compensation, or is the business, whatever it is. Global mechanism up to the vision plans, all those questions are now appear. Will what is the role of the governments, communities, and what would be the direction of the commitment to the climate finance? Unfolding the points, and now request Advocate Ayman Charqui. She, Director Hassan, Center for Environment Planning, Deputy Chair IUCN WCEL, and she, CLGI Chair and Lead Counsel, Center for International Sustainable Development Law. I believe
I think he is online with us. Yeah. Advocate Ayman Charqui, are you with us?
Hello, yes, can you hear me?
Wonderful. Yes, we can. Thank you, Ayman. And of course, thank you especially for your incredible work across
greetings. I'm connecting.
Yeah,
lovely.
Across all of Africa on adaptation, agriculture. We're waiting to hear governance gaps.
Oh, thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm speaking to you live from Morocco. I'll be joining you in Bonn in a couple of days. So what I wanted to come in, and thank you for highlighting the important role that we need to, the important focus that we need to give on adaptation, particularly when it comes to acting with courage and to contribute to the objectives of the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. As I'm sure you've noted, the overall topic of today's event, courage, contributions and compliance. And I believe that from the perspective of a center, so the HACEN, the Second International Center for Capacity Building, as well as from the perspective of an expert network here, lawyers and jurists from all over the world, capacity building needs to be put front and center of our action when it comes to climate change. As we all know, we have an important deadline next year, February of 2020. And it is of prime importance that we make sure, to the best of our abilities, that within each of the NDCs that will be updated, or the new NDCs that will be communicated next year, that our community, as the legal community, facilitates a maximum amount of ambition, the highest ambition possible when it comes to meeting the objectives of the Paris Agreement. You were indicating moments ago, you were referring to the advisory opinion of ITLOF, that is an ally in our quest to further ambition and actions in the context of the Paris Agreement, but also more broadly. We have other allies. I want to also connect to a statement that was made, I can't quite recall if it was days ago, from the United Nations Secretary General, indicating again and again the urgent need for action on both mitigation, adaptation, but of course taking into account loss and damages as an important part of the equation. So as you may see, I'm currently standing outside, and I wanted to some activities to bring you outside of the room and to show you some of the activities we're doing here today at the center. Why are we doing these activities today? Because June the 7th is right in between two important days at the international level. We have the World Environment Day on the 5th, and then tomorrow we'll be celebrating the World Ocean Day. So today we're having, and we've been doing activities all throughout the week. Today in particular, we are focusing on youth. And I wanted to highlight the important role that youth needs to play, must play, and can play when it comes to furthering ambition and action. And to do that, I wanted to give you two among many examples. One, in the context of the IUCN World Commission on Environmental Law, chaired by Professor Christina Voigt, we have a specialist group that focuses on climate change law that is co-chaired by Francesco Sedico and Fabiano Correa, but we also have a specialist group that is focused on earlier career. So all the upcoming lawyers, legal practitioners that want to engage in the broad field of environmental law can engage through this particular specialist group. The other example I wanted to provide you with is just to take a short walk with me. Let me see if I can do that. Yes, I can. So you can see the kind of stakeholders that are committed for environmental action. You have literally, and you can see from the chairs or maybe of the people next to me, around me, you have people literally that are preschool children. You have people that are working in the private sector, you have people working in the public sector. You have people that are working in the civil society. Yes, you can see literally how adorable they are. And we have different activities connected to raising awareness about the need of environmental development. You can see arts plays an important role there. You have different activities. We have artificial intelligence also that needs to be addressed when it comes to the gaps of climate governance. Oh, sorry, I'm done. Okay, I'm guessing that's it for my time. All right, thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Ivan Charqui, yes.
I wanted to finish with music, but
Totally play music for us.
yes, in the beginning we capturing in the we are reflecting the same point, the ambition actions and UN Secretary General's, is continuous, he is taking attention, drawing attention for the urgent need. Well, we are, and then now I would request for Advocates Susan and Samuel, researcher, University Leeds, Fellowship Officer, CISDL.
And I don't think Ayman had a chance to tell you, but all of that greenery that you could see in front of the booths where the children have their activities is a herb and organic plant facility where his center is training young people in growing Moroccan native plants that can then be used for cooking. So when you looked out over that area, he's literally bringing us straight from Morocco, some of the work that they're doing on the ground, as well as in the air in international law. Susan.
Thank you, Professor. So I'll be quick, just throwing in 3 ideas. And especially now that we saw Ayman showing about the wooden chairs and the involvement of children and youth in the whole discourse, like that's the exact gap that I want to address and say. So when we look into the entire climate law and governance, I just want to a notion about in the 1960s, there has been an effect called the butterfly effect, where the small minor intervention has created the transformation and pathways to change in a tornado. So in that study, this was further developed by striking a chord by Catherine McKinnon and stating about the butterfly effect and law and politics and how human intervention can actually change the discourse. So I would like to say about how youth has been actually changing the discourse and can do so. So if I can say a little about the 3 things that I thought about, was the first is about, so climate justice has become like a soft power
where especially after 2018 with Greta Thunberg's activism, that things have been going a lot higher. But how receptive has law been to this? In such a stance that we say, like, so we heard from Professor Payam about the ITLOS, and we've been hearing about this. And that happened just a few days before Bonn. And such a legal activity, legal process, pushing to a political process here at Bonn. And now we're thinking about the COP29. So what goes in Bonn, Baku, and beyond? And how does youth come into the whole thing? Like when they have been voicing their opinion, is law receptive enough? For instance, with themes of loss and damage, you'll hear from Hafizul Islam, and more, like climate finance, like Professor Megan Bowman said. So in this soft power, how has the law been effective? Is it? We're still demanding justice. And the second thing is about human rights, the mainstream developing and voice their opinion, and how youth, most of the litigation, climate litigation by the youth, have been catapulted mainstreaming human rights. You look into Rabat, Ridhima Pandey was India, all of these. And the third, the three can be by the youth. So this takes me to legal enterprising, of which how it is Dr. Antoinette Nestor will talk about later. So
Thank you. Thank you. We have 2 rounds of round table. First of all, we are just round table related to the gaps, and now we'll connect to the innovations, and to bridging the gaps. I will hand over to Professor Merrick.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Kazi, and thank you especially for chairing that roundtable despite the slight choppiness of our speakers coming in online, who were here yesterday and are arriving tomorrow, but today they're joining us from Morocco and London. And thank you especially to our speakers who managed to come in from Cologne on 2 seconds as we were starting, and especially to Susan for her excellent presentation. We're greatly looking forward to seeing your work flourish in this field. We're going to turn to innovative solutions towards more ambitious NDCs, not just in relation to mitigation, as our US colleagues so kindly reminded us during the Global Stocktake Dialogue yesterday, but also in relation to adaptation, which many countries consider to be incredibly important for their NDCs. And we're going to turn in this respect to our colleagues who have joined us today here in person, which means that I can be much more strict with you about time. And I will start by inviting Advocate Hafiz Khan, who's the Executive Director of the Center for Climate Justice of Bangladesh, and also serves on the Executive Committee of the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage. He will be joined by Advocate Runa Khan, who is founder and Executive Director of Friendship in Bangladesh, and also by Professor Alexandra Lemon, who is president of the Environmental Law Commission of the Brazilian Bar, the OEB, the Rio Grande do Sul. And she's also, of course, a leading professor and academic in this field, who, just like the rest of us, climate change impacts to come. She is from one of the cities in Brazil that was drastically affected by the flooding just this last few weeks, and actually does not have an airport at the moment. So she has traveled a long way to be with us through many different points. And finally, we will be very, very welcoming for Dr. Annette Nestor, who's the Climate Law and Governance Initiative Manager, as well as a fellow at Lucy Cavendish College in the University of Cambridge, originally from Chile and Ireland, who will be helping to close the panel with an invitation, actually a series of exciting invitations in relation to climate law and governance. So I will ask if Advocate Hafiz Khan would like to speak briefly, either at the mic or by swapping places quickly with Jean-Pascal. Let's swap places because there may be questions, and we want to have you on the hot seat. No. Thank you very, very much. And thanks again to Professor Jean-Pascal for starting us off with the gaps, and there are indeed gaps. Hafiz, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Facilitator, Professor Marie Clara. So let me start with saying that mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage is a continuum. Mitigation and adaptation that can avoid and minimize the potential risk of loss and damage. But unfortunately, inadequate mitigation and adaptation efforts resulting the loss and damage, our vulnerable communities, ecosystems are facing every day massive loss and damage. So we need to see we need to address also loss and damage. So I would like to highlight some of the points related to capacity building to address loss and damage. But before that, we need to understand the loss and damage broader land at the global level, particularly under the Paris Agreement. We do see an institutional architecture that is Warsaw International Mechanism. There are two constituted bodies are working under the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage. One is the Executive Committee. I'm also a member of that Executive Committee. This Executive Committee we do consider as a policy arm. At this moment, Executive Committee in collaboration with 5 other expert groups are developing some technical guides, for example, how to mainstream the human mobilities in the national adaptation planning processes. But challenge is these technical guides needs to be translated considering the national circumstances, because these technical audience for these technical guides are the national governments, national actors. So who's gonna translate these globally guides? Those guides by the national government. Then again, there is another institution we established in Madrid, 2009, that is called Santiago Network, that aims to catalyze the technical assistance. So these technical guides could be further utilized with support from the technical assistance from the Santiago Network. There is also another constituted body, that is Advisory Board for the Santiago Network. Finally, we established the Loss and Damage Fund. There is another constituted body, that is Loss and Damage Fund Board, that is currently engaged with developing further modalities. And I'm also an advisor with LDC board member. So we are currently engaged with World Bank, how to ensure the supremacy of the board of the fund, how to ensure the independence of the secretariat. We would like to see the World Bank just hosting this fund. So now challenge is that once it is operationalized this year, we need to access the policy guidance from the Executive Committee of the Warsaw International Mechanism. We need to access the technical assistance from the Santiago Network. We need to access the fund from the Loss and Damage Fund. So we need to build up our capacity, our institutional structure at the national level. So we need to build up all capacities of all relevant stakeholders so that we can develop our national policies, plans, and institutions so that we can access these resource, financial, technical, and capacity building supports available. This is the time to go back home, and we need to work very carefully to design our national institutional landscape so that we can access the resources available at the global level. I thank you.
Thank you, Advocate Hafiz, and actually some innovations that were in the COP process. We were there with you in Dubai. We were there with you in the late hours at the very end of the Sharm el-Sheikh COP, and the work that has been done to establish necessary for those who were not understanding, and then to establish the response fund for loss and damage, and then the innovations that are now needed on the ground to access is truly remarkable and deserves the deepest of recognition. I'm going to turn to Advocate Runa Khan now, who I believe has some further innovations to share.
So coming down from a very global picture to a reality, because to understand climate justice, to understand justice for those who are impacted, we need to understand what is injustice. And injustice is when Mashkura loses her third child because of salinity, which has seeped in. Injustice is Abdur Rahman has to give his 14-year-old daughter for marriage to a 30-year-old man because he doesn't know how to feed his 4 daughters, because he has migrated 4 to 5 times that particular year, losing all his homes. There are no statistics for migration. Internally displaced people, climate refugees, they are still not acknowledged as such, forcibly displaced, losing basic human rights and rights to access of basic needs, health, life, they fall into a vicious circle. Each migration, each time they migrate, they become poorer, losing everything, losing dignity and hope for further survival. And it's not only for today. The State Acquisition Tenancy Act, in Bangladesh of 1950, if you lose your land and it comes back after 30 years, you don't even get it back. So you are left not only for this generation, for the coming generation, without anything. So what do? We realize that ad hoc interventions which come in for a particular climate disaster is needed. Food is needed, shelter is needed. But what is needed is preparedness and planning so that these people can get a kind of a platform and not quicksand on which they can every time a disaster happens. How can we do that? There are solutions. Do we really want to absorb them? Or somebody else has done that, so we don't want to take them? Or we actually find that there is money, but they don't want to put it into somebody else's solution. This is up to the international bodies and the governments to understand and really feel, but solutions exist. Few solutions. Take our hydrodynamically kind of built plinths, which are highlands. So every time a person is migrating, you're getting poorer. On these plinths, which are oval shaped, you have communities staying there, 25 during in the village, 100 people, all getting shelter. They come all their belongings, and next year they haven't lost anything. So we see the little huts today. Next year, suddenly we see much stronger tin houses. Within 1 year, they could jumpstart that life with that little solution. Here you put in solar villages. When you put in solar villages, the economy not only of that particular person, the electricity comes, the schools, later, even at home, of the where the economy was closing at 5 o'clock in the evening, can stretch at night during a feast or a festival. All the other islands are all coming in and making an agricultural boom. So immediately leverages happen. And these solar villages are strong, kilowatts, so they migrate. In the coastal belt in the south, saline, it's not only the cyclones for which you need immediate action, long-term action for the salinity, which comes in and washes away all livelihood. Here you need mangroves. Here are actually in a reality of plantation than the mangroves in the Amazon forest, where you leave it and the mangroves grow. You can have 50 cents for one mangrove. Here you need $5, simply because every community is for that inch, because they can get livelihood today. Mangroves can give you livelihood, protection, so that salinity does not wash away the embankments, to carbon sequestration. You make a package deal, because this is how you can continue if we if you are requiring carbon sequestration for tomorrow in areas where there are human beings and human survival. This pressure cannot only be given for replication, fast scaling, because we need it today, it needs to be done. All these actions, and there are many more in not only the government, but the international bodies, the international development organizations, the GCFs and climate funds here, there, they all have to understand that this is a human right. This is injustice. And with this injustice, whatever action is created, if it is not looked upon, that action is not done with future in mind, with human dignity, human hope in mind, it cannot work. So this awareness needs to be given to them today. Tomorrow is too late for the people.
Thank you very much, Khan. And I'm continuing this conversation, this work, which is important. Professor Alessandra Lehmann, the floor.
Thanks so very much for having me here. Adaptation and resilience. And I was tasked today with a Brazilian. So I feel that I speak about the floods that hit Brazil 2 weeks ago. The very first thing that I don't want hard facts, but the very first thing today is that it's unprecedented. We had 120 millimeters of rain in just over 4 days. It was the fourth severe in the region. So we had September and November of 2023 that led to little action in the way of adaptation. The floods that hit April and have affected over of the state, which is an area to that of the UK. It has over 500 people and have 169 deaths. While my state of Rio Grande do Sul generally perceived as a more affluent state, has significant pockets of vulnerability and marginalization, and low has of course been identified as a driver of flood impact. A report that was released just the World Weather Initiative led by the London, even with the impact of El Nino, the floods were made twice by climate change. Another that I think it's really interesting and that I want to mention because I think that it highlights the law and this is finding that we as practitioners in Brazil had already considered in our work. We do have advanced environmental that protect construction, limit land changes. They are applied or enforced, which leads to more flood-prone lands and, of course, increases the exposure of both people and infrastructure to flood risks. Another interesting finding that highlights the role of adaptation is the fact that forecasts and warnings of the floods were available nearly a week in advance. So we really need to work on communication of risk, appropriate communication of risk that would lead to appropriate life-saving action. So I'm going to keep my intervention short. I have to say that Brazil did enact its plan in 2000. of Brazil's plan in plan includes at least types of policies. It did the sustainable development still needs to go with regard to actual. So very quickly to strengthen adaptation in NDC. So first, I would say we need to understand what needs to be done. We still have states of the UNFCCC do not think they're legally mandated to work on by their NDC and country specific. Needs to consider sources of finance to close the adaptation finance gap. Needs to enhance stakeholders, and it very much grounded in reality. Must absolutely prioritize sectoral policies where they can make the most impact. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much as well. Deeply appreciated. I'm going to turn directly in terms of invitations to Dr. Antoinette.
Claire, and thank you to all the speakers. In the interest of time, I'm very quickly points. So basic governance initiative started back the origin of Montreal into, and since then we've created and innovations, and the ones that I'm going to mention is basically that in during COP26 we scale climate building worldwide, so pledged to get people by 2020 will be able to climate law and governance. Please reach out, check our website to see how you can actually and climate law and governance. It happens at COPs, and we have activities. As you can see there, so a few pictures actually. These pictures are from last year. And again, if you want to get involved, either as a student submitting an essay with us or submitting events, please reach out. And there are also plenty of opportunities, which you can find them on the slide, but I'm not going to go into too much. And yes, so I think we have a few minutes only for Princess Esmeralda, so I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think what you have signaled is that anyone in the room who is interested in helping to do more work that is so desperately needed on climate law and governance, not just in response to the mitigation aspects of the Paris Agreement, but also in terms of adaptation, resilience, loss and damage, and of course, especially finance. You can come and speak to Antoinette or to Aniska or to Susan or others here. Susan actually has been leading the Climate Law Capacity Pledge and the Capacity Registry. And there are already nearly 3,000 lawyers registered from all over the world who are ready and waiting to assist with some of these cases, or indeed, frankly, leading and already doing the work on, and happy to hear from those who need them. I will recognize, especially here with my colleagues on this panel, that the idea of the Climate Law Capacity Pledge came from a challenge that was given to us by Professor Salih Mook. Salih Mook emphasized the need to mobilize lawyers to the work that they were doing and join the side of the angels. And of course, he is now himself with the angels, and I'm hoping that he's proud of what has grown from his challenge to us. So I'm going to turn now to a very, very dear guest, who is, of course, a special friend of friendship, and I will ask Kazi to introduce.
Yes, now it's time for Her Royal Highness Princess Mary Esmeralda. You know very well that she is very vocal and advocate for the rights of indigenous people and women rights, and she's very much a strong voice for protection of the environment. And she has many portfolios, and she is the president of the King Leopold III Fund for Nature Exploration and Conservation. She's also the honorary president of the Delphos patron of the Princess Leon Cardiology Foundation and member of the board of the Vernuga Belgium Foundation, and long list, and she is chair. Her Royal Highness Princess Esmeralda.
Thank you so much, Kazi, for the nice word, and I'm really honored to be part of this event today. I just have a few comments in following this very interesting panel. The fight against climate crisis is above all a fight for human rights and justice. We know that the climate crisis is sexist, it's racist, it exacerbates inequality. A few of our basic human rights which are threatened is right to life, water, surface water, right to access to public hygiene, poor health, and the right to rising violates the right. And Professor Le told us about the floods in Brazil. We have had those floods in Brazil in the same time in Bangladesh, in the same time temperature in New Delhi, degrees Celsius. Very serious in the southern Africa. Talking about climate injustice, we know that, and we have heard it in this panel, the concern about the climate crisis. It's a fight for survival. And I always remember the Paris conference, they used to say as a slogan, 1.5 degrees to stay alive. But now they say 1.5 degrees, we might survive. Bangladesh also is particularly vulnerable to the climate crisis, as we have heard. 50 million people are living in poverty, and nobody is safe. In the north, it is the cyclone in the south, the floods in the center, and in the north, it's the drought. So people living in the Charles areas, which are the sandbar islands of Bangladesh, are suffering the most. Also women, because we said climate crisis is sexist, and it's so true. Women are particularly affected. And in Bangladesh, like also in Africa, and have to walk kilometers and fetch water. Bangladesh has been forced to adapt its agriculture to the crisis with a variety of rice resistant and flooding, but it needs to raise road levels, build shelters, and of course, friendship is very much engaged in all those adaptation projects. But for that, I don't know if my internet is bad. Can you still hear me?
We are hearing you, but it is becoming just a bit uneven. So if you want to say your final message very clearly.
For this adaptation, we need money. For this transfer of technology, we need money, and Paris Agreement has to be reflected and has to have that mention of human rights aspect. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Princess Esmeralda. Faded out at the very end, but thank you for your closing comments. We have some questions online, but we are also just at the end of our time. So I will still see if there are 2 questions in the room that we can answer quickly, or 2 questions online. I knew it. Yes, please, go ahead.
Bermuda, where the CIDS conference took place. I was not at home. I was in Nairobi negotiating biodiversity. But we are fighting to protect our mangroves along the coastlines. That's where the developers want to put their hotels. And so our resilience to climate impacts, hurricane storms are reduced. And so our governance process requires me now to hold governments accountable. We have laws in place, but the laws are being broken. But thank God we ratified the Escazú Agreement, and we won a legal judgment just in February at the London Privy Council that gives us as individual rights. We can hold the governments accountable. So governance is at all levels. For the local people, for the government can carry their lawsuit to the international tribunal, but we also have processes in place to hold the said governments accountable. So it's a fight at all levels, from the people, the governments, to stay alive. 1.5. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to invite you, I can see, do you mind passing the microphone to our colleague in the back? Thank you, sorry. And I'm also going to invite you, if it's possible, to consider hosting a session at Climate Law and Governance Day with Baku. We're going to do it entirely online in order to respect our colleagues who won't be able to travel all of that way and couldn't afford a hotel room if they got there. and it would more of the going on with local government as part of our agenda. I have a second colleague who wanted to make a point of the.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Chioma from Nigeria. I point for the issues of the NDC low emission development.
Welcome.
Yes. So Africa is advancing in terms of implementing or formulating implementing the NDC, also starting to 3.0. The issue is that the key priority remains adaptation resilient. And every project that we have formulated in the NDC components, in as much as to mitigate, we will not jeopardize adaptation, but I have a constraint all the time. How do we measure adaptation and resilient? Because whatever that is not measurable will not attract the visibility that it needs for further engagement. Thank you.
Very good point. We cannot measure what we cannot manage what we are not measuring. So thank you very much for that point, and we will also look to reflect that in the agenda of the upcoming Climate Law and Governance Day. I'm going to turn to another Nigerian who is online with us because of challenges at the very last minute to say our thanks in closing. Thank you.
Thank you once again, Prof.
Yes, it's working. Okay.
The peculiar situation we face, like in this part of our world, we really need to bridge the gap of adaptation finance. You see local communities being impacted severely, especially right now in Nigeria, the rains have started in earnest, but you see intermittent delay here and there, which is already impacting on even the farming system, that will ultimately, we are getting worried about the impact it will have on food security. So adaptation finance is something that needs to be looked into. Local communities, they need to be supported so that they will be able to have a meaningful livelihood, to avoid migration, which we know in Nigeria has been causing a lot of crisis here and there. So the issue of adaptation finance should be taken seriously, and we need more legal framework that will enable the survival of these local communities. Thank you very much.